the news got you unsettled and worried? Feeling uncomfortable with the absolute state of things? Well, one way to help that unnerving feeling of discomfort is by heading over to British-Boxers.com, where they do knockout undies and nightwear, and you'll be as snug as a bug in some very nice pants as you swear in despair at the television. Not only do British Boxers have luxurious two-fold cotton on all of their clothes, but they're also a lovely ethical bunch who respect workers' rights, manufacture all their stuff with minimal waste, and, actually they're almost too nice a bunch. It's ridiculous. Hasn't anyone dug up any dirt on them? Have they ever returned a library book back late or something? Wow, no, not even... Oh my goodness. Well, if you grab great garms from BritishBoxers.com, then use the code PARPOLBRO15 at the checkout and you'll get a swanky 15% off whatever you buy, which will hopefully make you feel less sad that you're just not as good as them. Sorry, I'm just projecting now. British-Boxers.com. They must have once done swears at someone's parking. No, not even that. Bonkers. Hello and welcome to the Partly Political Broadcast, the comedy politics podcast that is an expert on unsuccessful plans to boost growth. I'm Tiernan Douieb, and this week as Chancellor and paperweight for a head, Kwasi Kwarteng says his mini-budget was not a gamble with the UK economy, but a reboot, I ask if that's true, then why didn't he properly follow the trend of reboots by having an entirely new cast, aim at a younger generation, and really piss off all existing fan bases? What do you imagine when you hear the term trickle-down economy? For me, it's someone with loads and loads of money spraying a free flow of piss out of a penthouse apartment and everyone in the slums on the streets below desperately trying to catch drops of it in a cup. The idea has been in regular use in politics for quite some years that the best way to grow an economy is to give the rich people even more money, and then that money trickles down to those who actually need it. Yes, of course it does. You know, in the same way if there's someone that's really, really hungry and I eat a sandwich, eventually they will be full of sandwich too. No, wait, no, hang on. No, they can gather crumbs that fall off my sandwich. Or maybe just through some sort of grub osmosis, they too will feel full from sheer selfless empathy for my loaded tummy. What's happened in previous years is that those with money have gained more and more of it, and to benefit the rest of the country, they've avoided tax by putting that money into offshore accounts, laundered it through property, or started a brand new Lord of the Rings TV series. Which, to be fair, I'm really enjoying as my weekly dose of escapism. Oh shit, is that how trickle-down works? Economics can be hard to understand, but let me put it like this. If you give workers a pay rise, they will spend their money on food, goods, other services, things that put money back into the economy and support businesses and other people, and that will definitely cause inflation. How? Well, why would you ask a complicated question like that? It just will, okay? Alright, stop it. Whereas if you remove the cap on bankers' bonuses, they'll put their money into secretive banking systems and cocaine dealers' pockets, and then one day, if you just believe in her really hard, the money fairy will deposit a rolled up £10 into one of your orifices with unnecessary force. It's very clear which way is best, isn't it? On Friday, wannabe anime villain and Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng unceremoniously unleashed a stream of urine over the entire country, bar maybe 5% of it who'd specifically lobbied him to piss on others. It wasn't really a mini-budget, unless you can say that by removing all the actual cost calculations and forecasts, that somehow reduced its size. Like if you had an uncooked pie and said, no, it's not that we haven't bothered doing the most important bit, it's just, a little pie that only very rich households can have a piece of. Kwarteng said his fiscal plans would herald a new era for the UK, but he didn't specify what type of era, and if this one meant that we were leaving the modern era to descend into something a bit more like the very early ones, but with the internet making it worse. The disaster era, if you like. Taxes have been cut, the income basic rate of tax has been dropped from 20% to 19%, and the planned national insurance rise has been scrapped because Kwarteng said it's important that British people keep more of the money they earn so that he doesn't have to increase your wages and can deprive the health service of funds at the same time. Two birds brutally pummeled to death with a very large stone. He's also cut the top rate of tax from 45% to 40%, but it will benefit you though. Look at it this way. If you're earning £20,000 a year, you will now save a whole £167, which you can put towards that £3,000 energy bill or food shop where butter costs more than buying a football club. Whereas if you're on £200,000 a year, you'll save £5,000, and that's totally fair, that is, because that £5,000 will trickle down to everyone else via the expensive soaps that you'll buy with it, and then they'll get washed down the sink, and if the rest of us stand at the base of their drain pipes, we'll get a lovely fragrant waft of them every now and then, and that is equality, that is, right there. Kwasi Kwarteng wants to keep cutting taxes too and release people of the tax burden. And he's right, tax is indeed a burden. I mean, not in general, but right now, when it directly funds destructive wankers like him, then I'd much prefer to not fund him not funding anything. Actually, scrap that, I'd like to pay tax and then get an itemised bill for when I do. Though I bet Kwarteng would add a hefty service charge. His idea is that cutting tax funds investment, and by cutting corporation tax too, loads of companies will see the UK as somewhere they too can dump shit into the rivers and not be able to sell things to the EU. But we already have the lowest corporation tax in the G7, and it hasn't helped at all so far, so it's possible, just maybe, that it wasn't the corporation tax that was keeping them away, and maybe, just possibly, it's knowing that the country is governed by people who would be underqualified to run an egg and spoon race, let alone the UK. Remember, not so long ago, raising taxes was the only way to fix the economy, and now lowering taxes is the only way to fix the economy. And it's possible at Tory HQ, they just have a large wheel with shit politics on it, and they see what it lands on the night before. They probably borrowed it from ITV's This Morning. Popping into Parliament on one of the only days he's been to work since July 22nd, the Chancellor announced that he'd be tightening rules on universal credit to ensure people work more. If you do less than 15 hours a week, you'll have to take up even more steps to find work, even though doing all those steps will take up so much time you won't be able to work in them. The idea that the economy is down due to people not working enough, that is true, but the people in question are all MPs. The cap on bankers' bonuses is to be lifted, thank Christ. I mean, haven't they been through enough? Finally, a lifeline to the people who can't quite fill their swimming pools in their fourth house full of cash, and now they can. And I think it's great that they've got another free rein on cash after the last one that caused a crash, and then the one after that to fix the crash that they caused that we had to then pay off. Kwarteng says such a move will attract top talent to the city, but I think they'll be all too busy doing Masked Dancer or Strictly, so it's likely it'll just be the same money-grabbing cunts that were there before. Oh, wait, sorry, does he mean in terms of the drug dealers? Yeah, no, that makes loads more sense. I reckon they'll all be in that area of town before long. No wonder Kwarteng was giggling with glee at the Queen's funeral like he too had been nostril diving into happy snow because, well, he probably was, but also he knew that everyone else attending would be even richer by Friday and he wouldn't even have to justify the figures or provide a forecast for what might happen. He just kept saying it'll boost growth. Of what? The financial ravine the country's in? The shit creek we're paddling in? Tremors, poverty and ambulance waiting times? Or maybe just sheer animosity towards the Tories? I mean, not from the papers, of course, who already called it a real Tory budget. Well, yes, it is, in that it's full of the worst ideas anyone's ever had, and no one gave them a mandate to do it. Sticking a real Tory before any idea is now just a sign it's going to be horrendous, isn't it? Finally, a real Tory theme park, they say, as children are stuck upside down for 8 days on the one ride in a polluted gravel pit operated by people who get paid only in tokens to use at the park's vendors, which are all closed due to understaffing. Kwarteng may not be providing any details or forecasts, but after his announcement the pound plummeted in value against the dollar, and then the euro, and then even Bitcoin, prompting the concern that we're days away from the Chancellor selling the pound as an NFT to one of his friends, and then even when we earn money, someone else will just show a picture of it and spend it before we can. And then it plummeted again later that day, and then it plummeted on Monday morning so super hard that it was almost like it was saying, I'm not coming back, guys, I'm gone for good. It does mean, though, that we can now breathe a sigh of relief that perhaps the entire country's assets won't be bought by soulless corporations, but possibly also, tourists who pop over for a week and think it's well worth one of their travellers' checks to now own all of Western under Lizard. Crispin Odey, a sort of what if Billy Bunter followed Sauron sort of a man, and also a hedge fund manager and current employer of Kwasi Kwarteng as a political advisor for his asset management company, well, his funds were boosted by 145% on Friday, having betted against the pound, much like he did when Brexit happened too, which he backed. A coincidence, I'm sure. I mean, these things just happen, right? I mean, chances are, if and when Odey asked Kwarteng to take such action that would be beneficial to him, the Chancellor was too off his tits to listen anyway, and it's just because he's only interested in money and wishing poor people were dead that he did it. Is it a conflict of interests, or is it that all the people in these positions have exactly the same interests, and it's to make sure everyone with less money has the worst life ever? Wig on a rubber chicken and Prime Minister Liz Truss said in advance of the mini-budget that she wasn't afraid of making difficult decisions like giving bankers bigger bonuses. But, I mean, that's not really a difficult decision, is it? It's a shit decision, and if she finds making the worst shit decisions very hard, then we'd all much prefer it if Liz Truss only made easy decisions. I mean, there's no need for her to make her job harder at all. Just go with the one everyone likes. Go on, Liz. No one will mind or call you a slacker. Truss said she was willing to be unpopular as Prime Minister, which I think is quite funny as she doesn't really have a choice if that happens or not. That's like me saying I'm willing to be picked last to play on the football team, or not even get invited to watch, or even have friends that play football in the first place. Truss set off to meet US President and, wanna feel old? This is what Ness from Earthbound looks like now, Joe Biden, last week. But without her Chief of Staff and colourless Christopher Biggins, Mark Fulbrook, because he's being investigated by the FBI as a witness to alleged bribery. Number 10, of course, insisted Fulbrook didn't go to the US with Truss because actually he was working on government business. But it's since been revealed that he's being paid his salary by his lobbying firm and is only seconded to Number 10 in an arrangement that they're refusing to explain. But Mark Fulbrook insists it's not for tax benefits, even though Kwarteng has brought in reforms to make this even easier to do. So, is Mark Fulbrook just part-time at Number 10 because I guess the rest of the cabinet are, or more likely is this all shadier than Adam Levine's choices for the names of his kids? Liz Truss doesn't have an ethics advisor, remember? But because she knows the difference between right and wrong and refuses to have any of the former in her cabinet in case they snitch on the others. Truss did meet with Biden, but not before warning that a US trade deal with the UK was unlikely to happen anytime soon, which is funny because we were told it was all sewn up post-Brexit. I wonder if it's one of those things that sort of gets lost in translation, where in English it's like, oh, this deal is done, but in America that means this is never fucking happening, especially if you fuck up Ireland again. Oh no, I mean, who's going to buy the NHS now? Oh, that's right, absolutely any tourist who's got a few coins left in their own currency when they pop over for a city break. Truss announced this during an interview on the 102nd floor of the Empire State Building, probably thinking it'd give her some sort of status, but really just more strongly connecting her government to the film Oblivion. The meeting with the President was about Ukraine and also ensuring the UK government prioritised peace in Northern Ireland, which Liz Truss is going to do by forgetting about it entirely and hoping that means it's sorted. Biden had tweeted just the day before that he's sick of trickle-down economics, it has never worked, so I'm pretty sure the two of them had loads to talk about. This is all disaster capitalism. Yes, that term is essentially the same word twice, a double negative if you will. We've seen it before over the last 12 years of the same people who keep saying they're different people, and yet this government, as headed up by Liz Truss, are full speed ahead driving a bulldozer into society in an even more vicious way. They've only been in power for 20 days, well, if you exclude the 4,383 that they were already in power, but it was definitely someone else. And in that time, we have fiscal policy that sees a recession and decides its best bet is to shave it all off and pretend we're bald by choice. And then we've got whatever mushroom was depressed Therese Coffey as Health Secretary says she'll reduce ambulance and appointment waiting times, but also says they'll be scrapped. I mean, I suppose that is one way to reduce them. I guess she'll also reduce the amount of people who need hospital care by just cutting off the 999 phone lines so they can't get through, and therefore they're probably fine. Home Secretary, and did someone ask a child to make a picture of Elmo out of turnips, Suella Braverman, has insisted the police cut all crimes by 20%, but hasn't really said how they should do it. Of course, they could just arrest themselves and members of the Conservative Party, and that should erase most of that. But the only details Braverman has given is that they have to stop symbolic gestures, which would have been great to hear before the Queen's funeral. The Home Secretary does of course mean scrapping things like diversity training, which, let's be fair, in the case of the Met, just seems to have helped officers work out how to unfairly target. And it's said that actually they need to focus more on drug-fueled crimes and vandalism, so again, locking up most of the cabinet should cover that. And the most literally destructive of them all, the Business Secretary and man who you can only really see in his true form at the edges of your peripheral vision, Jacob Rees-Mogg, has announced the overturning of the fracking ban. Is it just because he hopes it'll unleash ancient soul-eating spirits from deep within the earth that he'll then control with spells from his Book of Ibon to become all-powerful? Or is it because he's got investments with fossil fuel firms that he doesn't need, as he's set to make even more millions selling off his investment firm that was set up with the help from Crispin O'Day? There he is again. I mean, are all of these policies that come up with themselves, or is it that someone like O'Day or another donor just handed the Truss government a Christmas wish list and said pretty please? There was an announcement that they'd be overturning a ban on foie gras and fur as well, and there can be no political reason for that other than it's because Crispin loves spending every Thursday smearing goose fat on his groin while lying on a bed of dead minks. Rees-Mogg said there'd been opposition to more fracking, but Story said the critics were funded by Putin. Considering much of it has come from within his own party, he's probably right. Growth, that is what it's all about, and while some people's wallets get much, much fatter, hopefully the rest of the country will grow tired of having a government that is essentially running things like a criminal racket. Unfortunately for the rest of us, the opposition see that racket and think rather than bring it down, they should play friendly tennis against it. The Shadow Chancellor, and definitely an evil head teacher in a children's drama, Rachel Reeves, spoke after the mini-budget announcement and thanked Kwarteng for demolishing the Tories' record of the last 12 years, which he has in one way by overturning what all the previous chancellors have done. But at the same time, their record for the last 12 years has been to fuck absolutely everything up, and they're very much continuing to do that, but even more. Reeves accused the Tories of being detached from reality, which they are, and siding with the wealthy, which they do, but also Reeves absolutely doesn't do, with her donations from millionaires and companies that she fails to disclose. What will Labour do regarding Kwarteng's announcements? Well, they won't reverse all of them, just the 5% of the top rate of tax, but they're not going to push it any more than that because they don't want their donors to be upset. Nor would they reverse the 1p cut on income tax because that would mean they'd have to raise workers' wages, and then what would their donors say? There is such a fear of offering an actual different future from Labour that all they present is a watered-down version of what we currently have, like Tory squash, which is still very bad for you, but at least just slightly more hydrated, and you won't have to consume quite so much trickled-down piss. Based on current polls and the idea we'll ever have an election again, Labour is set to win a 56-seat majority by simply being there, like the drunk rebound before you wake up the next day and realise you've made a terrible mistake and would have been much better just staying in. Or, like 2012 to 2013, where Labour were in the lead and still lost the next election because of a sandwich. The Labour conference in Liverpool this weekend started with party leader and man who looks like he's made of strawberry refresher bars pushed into a suit, Keir Starmer, leading the conference in a rendition of the national anthem with a giant banner showing a picture of the Queen above them. Yes, nothing like the party that is for the many, singing about hoping a monarch will reign over everyone for ages. Why stop there? Why not prove how patriotic you are by having the whole event in a wicker memorial to the Queen, draped in slabs of British beef and fish, and set it alight after your final words? Maybe just fill everyone's lunchboxes with boots for licking and end the conference by giving everyone a complimentary tattoo of the Union flag right on their genitals. Let's commit to honouring the late Queen's memory, said Starmer, forgetting that the best way to do that would be to keep his initial leadership pledge to tackle low pay for workers, and then all that extra cash they'd get would have her face on it, so he wouldn't have had to shell out for a banner at all. Labour have launched their roadmap to a fairer, greener future, which really should have been a footpath or cycle lane if that's what they want. It definitely has some glimpses of what could be good and very necessary ideas, if they hope to develop them beyond sound bites or keep them for longer than a year. Starmer's ambition is to be off fossil fuels by 2030, but it can be hard to change when you're addicted like that. It does explain quite a lot if he gets up every day and huffs coal. Good luck to him, I say. Labour have also pledged to bring the railways back into public contracts, which is good and on the right track in all sense of the word. It's only as current contracts expire, so I very much expect Liz Truss's government to quickly sign several 20-year contracts before they get booted out in order to ruin it. What the roadmap doesn't contain is any possibility of electoral reform, despite many of the party members calling for it, and it is going to be debated at the conference. Starmer says it's not a priority, because then I suppose people's votes would matter, and that'd really ruin in getting to sing about having a king. Of course, it's great that the Conservatives may well lose the next election, even if by 2024, if that's when it is, all we have left of the UK is the City of London and then vast swamplands or cracked earth, with elections having to take place by collecting sticks that aren't too covered in shit. But it would still be nice to have the prospect of an even better future than we have at the moment, which is like now, but only 95% as bad. It still seems that sadly the only way Labour can give out a clear vision is when it's a massive screen with the Queen's face on it. Still, I suppose that's slightly better than just basing all your policies around Crispin O'Day's cock. Apparently, rumours have it that Conservative MPs are already putting in letters of no confidence to the 1922 committee against Truss. This is the thing with a party built on horse racing fans. They think if they back the wrong one, they can just have it put down when it fails and get another. Well, nothing will get the public back on side like another 3 months of leadership elections while everyone else can't eat and US tourists pick up parts of Norfolk for less than the cost of an assault rifle. However, the 1922 committee say Liz Truss will still have a year before any of those letters can come into play. So we can look forward to this time in 2023 when the pound has become an anti-currency, and in order to swap it for even €1, you'll have to give up a couple of lungs or your firstborn. In Russia, Russian President and Vladimir, always in the middle of a difficult poo, Putin has stepped up drafting troops to continue fighting in Ukraine, saying that the West is engaging in nuclear blackmail. I'm not saying he's falling apart, but now Putin is threatened by Kanye. Thing is, I'm pretty sure it's Putin who's been saying that he'll fire all the nukes if the West even thinks about aiding Ukraine, so it'll be a real revelation if the West is actually his nickname for himself, and this has all been to do with a crisis of confidence. The first military mobilisation since World War II has caused anger and mass protests all over Russia, with 2,000 people detained this weekend and massive tailbacks at the border with people trying to leave the country. There is every chance this war will end with no one but Putin himself marching on Ukraine and getting calmly told to sit down and stop being a baby. The Foreign Secretary and face drawn on an orange, James Cleverly, confronted Russia over their war atrocities, which must have been a bit like getting a telling off for your behaviour by a flasher in the park. Downing Street said that Putin's move to draft soldiers is a clear admission of his failure, which must be galling for them that despite being involved in an illegal invasion, being responsible for so many deaths and lying about his intentions, Vladimir Putin's still being more transparent on his actions than the UK government have managed in 12 years. And finally, Italy have elected their first ever female Prime Minister. But she's also a fascist, so it's kind of like travelling in the direction of progression, but because you want to start a war with it and kill it off. Giorgia Meloni, looking like the character in a US drama who pretends she's a perfect housewife, but at night murders everyone who wronged her. She is the leader of the Brothers of Italy party, who despite their name sounding like it's lots of men who like to get together, they are strongly homophobic. They're also anti-abortion, very xenophobic, and anti-immigration, but despite that, Meloni says they will govern for everyone, so I'm not really sure how that's going to work. Her party will be in government as part of a right-wing alliance with Lega and Forza Italia, who are the party of former Prime Minister and political Weinstein Silvio Berlusconi, who've both lost loads of support in recent years. Overall, there's actually more voter preference in Italy for left-wing and centre parties, but like always, they don't get along, so it's allowed the far right to goose-step through because there's no place for nuanced opinions on their side. Critics say Meloni isn't a fascist, she's just patriotic and she says it like it is, which, depressingly how it is fascism. She uses a phrase that was often used by Mussolini, and her best bud is Hungarian leader and thumb Viktor Orban, who, is a fascist. So, if she's not one, she should really get some good PR advice. Sweden too have recently elected a far-right government, and the right-wing group in the European Council, the European Conservatives and Reformist Party, will now be the largest, which is all very worrying. Still, all those boomers that hark everything back to a war they weren't alive for must be pleased, because at least they'll actually get to be around for a fight against fascism now. I mean, probably shouting that actually the real Nazis are those woke lot fighting against them, while they get carted off to a camp because they carried a piece of A4 paper near the king. Hey, Pal Brods, how are you? Feeling that growth? Well, that sounded a bit weird, didn't it? It's not what I meant. I just meant, clearly you're all just glowing after Friday's mini-budget. As you now know, it's all going to trickle down just as we need it. Any minute now, any second. A little bit of trickling. Hey, look on the plus side. At least this show is back to a normal-sized podcast this week. On the downside, that's because there's been news, and it's all been terrible. I mean, naturally, not all terrible. There was a bit about a boat from 1,200 years ago that was found in the sea, and that was really exciting. But then it was found off the coast of Israel, and so all the comments beneath were really angry about everything except the boat, and so even that wasn't great. No, it was terrible. I just wanted to know, with that story, because it said on the boat they found sealed olive oil, olives, fish sauce, and supplies like that. Nowhere did it say if anyone had tried any of it. I mean, come on, right? Where's the news we actually need and demand? I want to know if someone tried over 1,000-year-old olive oil and then was instantly sick, or if it was like the most refined stuff on earth. Ancient olive oil. Anyway, look. I'm sorry, it's the news I need and demand, clearly. I spend a good 50% of my time worrying that I'm not doing enough and reading everything miserable in sight with the drive to know what's going on. And then the other 50% of my time absolutely regretting doing that because it's all terrible. And thank God there's a new Lord of the Rings show to escape into. Oh no, it's made by Jeff Bezos. Fuck, there is no winning. I should also say that I've just admitted that 100% of my time is self-absorbed despairing of different levels, but I want you to know in reality, I do occasionally tune into whatever my daughter is doing, and I've done quite well on Duolingo this week, so I now know how to say, he lives in a tree and his best friend is an owl, or I have a green bike in French. I don't have a green bike, but if I did, I could, so it's good to be prepared for all eventualities, I say. Not that I'm going to be going to France for a very long time either, because €1 is worth probably sort of 25 years of earnings and your pension and the sort of various outer members of your family, isn't it, to get one of those now? I hope you're doing okay, even though you know everything. I've mostly written and recorded this week's episode on Sunday. I've done some of it on Monday, like this bit now. This is on Monday now, so I know even more things have happened. I know the pound has just plummeted even harder into the ground and to the earth's core, but generally I've probably missed loads of things that have happened today, so sorry about that, but I was too busy writing about computer games, like for money, not just fun. But I would also do it for fun. Well, unless you hire people to write about computer games and you listen to this, in which case, hi, great to meet you, and I do still need money though, as I can't pay the heating bills with fun. Hopefully that's not the case though. Hopefully there isn't crazy amounts of news today, and this stays topical for at least a day this week, and I'm very sure the interview will as well. So, some quick things before we get to that. First quick thing, this is episode 285 of this show. Yes, really. Yes, I've wasted that much of my life on this. That's awful, isn't it? Just horrendous. But it also means in approximately 15 weeks' time, give or take me having a break for my sanity, it will be episode 300, right? 300. That's roughly 6,000 minutes of comedy monologues, goodness knows how many descriptions of politicians, and a comprehensive catalogue of all the shit that's happened since the 13th of January 2016. So, what should I do to mark it? What should I do for the 300th episode? Is there anything you'd like to hear? Any ideal guests or guests you'd like to see return? Should I answer your questions instead of doing an interview? Chances are that any plans I have will be overshadowed by the news, but if you've got any thoughts on what I should do to celebrate the 300th episode of me shouting into this microphone, then please do send them over to the partlypoliticalbroadcast@gmail.com address. Or, just shout at me in Sainsbury's. I'm always in there going, butter is how much? And you'll see me. I'm that one. I'm that guy. And the other thing you might have noticed is there's a new British Boxers ad at the top of the show. If you use the code PARPOLBRO15 at the British-Boxers.com site, you will get 15% off. I'm very aware it's a cost of living crisis, but if you do need pants and you can afford decent ones from very decent people, I would very much recommend. And also, I get a little bit of dosh if you use that code too, which is far more helpful than paying the heating bills. Or you could just fling dosh at the kofi.com/parpolbro or join the patreon.com/parpolbro and still have an uncomfortable bum. The choice is yours. Right, on this week's show, I am interviewing Aditi Jehangir at Living Rent, all about successfully campaigning for a rent freeze in Scotland. It's actually positive at the end. No, I don't know how either, but lap it up and enjoy it while it lasts. Home is where the heart is, apparently. Well, unless you're renting in the UK, in which case you have to hand over your heart to a landlord as part of a deposit, and they keep it in a safe somewhere until you leave, and they've removed a bit of it to cover cleaning costs. Housing is consistently one of the many areas of rising inequality in the country, with those at the top end of the wealth ladder, which is attached to a helicopter that's hovering too high for you to grab the bottom of it without another ladder that you can't afford. Well, those lot, they all have at least 1 million houses each. I've taken that from official figures, obviously. While everyone being told that they don't have enough income to get on the bottom rung is unlikely to ever own a home or even rent somewhere with any security at all. Private rent prices paid by tenants in the UK rose 3% in the 12 months to last April, with it being 3.5% in Scotland, and tenants in social housing have seen theirs increase by 4.1%. All the while, wages have, as you know, basically started trying to tunnel their way to Australia, I guess to join the pound. There is no right to housing in the UK. The Human Rights Act protects our right to enjoy possessions, but if you're living in someone else's home, then they can enjoy you selling off all your possessions to pay to live in their cupboard that they can't be bothered to fix the heating for. The average person in the UK spends more than 35 to 40% of their income on rent, and if you're above average and even slightly interesting or handsome, it's probably more. Actually, I have no idea, I was just basing that on my own situation. But for those landlords who actually still have a mortgage to pay off, they'll be seeing big increases in their monthly payments that they will say totally justifies charging tenants at least 6 times that for them to earn a living, letting you stay in that cupboard, and you should be grateful for all the space you have in there for your clothes and self and your brand new cockroach friends. So, what can be done? There was absolutely nothing in Kwarteng's mini-budget about rent controls because this is a man who prefers to let lobbyists buy his policy space outright. But in Scotland, freezing rents has been part of a package of measures the Scottish Government have brought in to ease the cost of living crisis this winter. I mean, only till March, obviously, but by then it'll be a bit warmer for you to sleep outdoors. Well, actually, not that much warmer in Scotland. It's still a big move, and one that, were it replicated around the rest of the UK, would have an absolutely massive impact for over 5 million households. But how were the Scottish Government persuaded to make that decision, and can the Westminster Government be persuaded to do the same? I mean, of course not, but it's nice to pretend a bit, isn't it? This week I spoke to Aditi Jehangir at Living Rent, the union in Scotland for low and middle income renters whose campaign to freeze rents was pivotal to the Scottish Government's decision in doing so. I asked Aditi about why renting in Scotland is quite so difficult right now, if the plans to freeze rent till March are enough, and just how they managed to successfully campaign for that result. Aditi even manages to somehow be positive at the end of this chat, which genuinely perked me up after having spent the morning watching Kwarteng drone on about how he's making your life better by making it worse. So I hope you enjoy and find this as informative and even hopeful a chat as I did. Here is Aditi. Hi Aditi, thank you so much for coming on the podcast this week. I'm not in Scotland, I'm down in the south, and so I wonder if you could just start by explaining to me what the situation for tenants in Scotland is right now, and what are the biggest problems? Is it a lack of properties in Scotland? Is it rising rent prices? Is it all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is not a great time for tenants, we are really excited that we have had a rent freeze in the past few weeks, which is great news for tenants as sort of an emergency move, but problems have been building for years, really. I'd say it's kind of a mixture of all of those factors. There's definitely really high rent prices at the moment, which means there's incredibly high competition for flats. There's lots of different people who are really, really struggling for finding anywhere at the moment. So I'm from Living Rent, Scotland's tenants union, and we're made up of thousands of members all across Scotland who are tenants who are all fighting for a better housing system. So we've heard lots of different stories from our members of loads of really high rent hikes, people having to bid for flats, find 6 months rent up front. At the moment, it's kind of around September, so university students are heading back, and it's absolute chaos, especially in Edinburgh and Glasgow, but also, up in Dundee, Aberdeen, St Andrews, anywhere the sort of uni places. For the first time, I think University of Glasgow has not guaranteed accommodation for their first year students. So that means, some people are going to have to drop out of their course potentially. There's, students in their later years as well, really, really struggling. We know of people who are really just like living on people's sofas and things at the moment, which it's really, really difficult for everyone. That's putting like an enormous strain. So thinking of that as well, I mean, lots of universities have just massively upped intakes over the years for obvious reasons of money. So there's lots of different reasons, I think, contributing to the housing crisis. We absolutely do need to build more social housing for people. And that's something that we've definitely seen go down, and that commitment that we've heard time and time again has not really borne through in social housing that has appeared or been built. But absolutely, at the moment, rent prices are really, really high. They've risen 63% in the last decade in Edinburgh and Glasgow.
Wow.
And obviously, none of our wages have gone up by that in the last decade, unfortunately. So, yeah, I think even though we're happy about the rent freeze at the moment, it doesn't really go far enough, and we've still got a lot of unanswered questions about it.
I definitely want to ask you more about the rent freeze. I mean, I was just going to say that I know Living Rent has lots of different sort of local groups. Are there particular areas in Scotland that are worse right now? Is it affecting sort of the bigger cities more, this crisis?
Well, it's quite different depending on different areas in Scotland, really. Obviously, there are more sort of private renters and social renters in cities, and that is where we have the most membership at the moment. But we are kind of expanding all across Scotland, and there are lots of issues which are in common. For example, in the Highlands and Islands, there's a really big problem with short-term lets and Airbnb, which is again something that we really struggle with, particularly in Edinburgh. So that's sort of a nationwide campaign that's being tackled in a few different ways. So where there's lots of different intricacies in terms of the housing system in Scotland, but yeah, I think at the moment in terms of rising rent prices, that is something that affects everyone across Scotland, but it sort of depends on the structure of where there are more renters. But it's all in conjunction with house prices and the other mess that makes up the housing system in the UK as a whole as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, so that's affecting everywhere right now. Because I mean, I'm a renter in London, and as I'm sure you know, it is absolutely horrible down here. And I wonder what are tenants' rights like in Scotland, because obviously that's dictated by the Scottish government, isn't it? I believe, rather than UK. This is where I always get a bit wrong with my what's Scottish law, what's sort of UK law. But I believe that tenants' rights dictated by the Scottish government. So are they sort of better than you might see in the rest of the UK? Are they pretty bad? How do they need to be? That laugh gave a lot away before I even finished the question. I was going to ask how do they need to be improved? Is the power still mostly in the hands of landlords?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say Scottish government, similar to UK government, is still made up quite heavily of lots of landlords who are in power. So, for instance, yesterday in Edinburgh Council, a councillor brought forward a motion to extend the rent freeze to council tenants in the city as well, and to sort of keep that rent freeze in place until rent controls are there, because otherwise it's a bit meaningless, because landlords can just jack up rent prices when the rent freeze finishes. And during that vote, councillors who were tenants were blocked from voting. Councillors who were landlords were also blocked from voting, but that's not something that we often see on housing votes at a Scottish government level. And it's incredibly frustrating, because tenants and landlords just absolutely are not in the same position, and tenants should be able to represent their constituents, which I'm sure everyone would agree in terms of fairness. So that was incredibly frustrating, but we're glad to see that has passed. But yeah, I think in terms of similarities, tenants are still very much at the mercy of landlords. Many properties in Scotland are in disrepair. About 65% of private rented flats in Scotland have disrepair to critical elements. And I think there's definitely, differences in kind of housing policy and how things work. Living Rent is now a tenants union, but we started off as a campaign group in 2014, campaigning around sort of greater legislative change for tenants. So that brought forward the introduction of the private residential tenancy contract in around then 2017, I believe. Don't quote me on the years, but
That's
that
right. Listeners can Google afterwards. I have no idea, so you're fine. Yeah.
So that means that tenants have a little bit more flexibility in terms of we have rolling leases and slightly greater protection from evictions than done in England and Wales. But there's still a lot that we can do. And as time went forward, we decided that the best structure for our group would be a union. So now we're a dues-paying union similar to a trade union, and we have a number of different ways that we try to bring about change. But yeah, I think definitely tenants' rights are not where they should be, as well as sort of that disrepair. Of course, with the cost of living crisis. Lots of homes in Scotland, rented homes are extremely cold and extremely poorly insulated. Again, that is not something that's particular to Scotland, but it is cold here.
Yeah.
So as well as bringing rents down, I think we need to have a focus on retrofitting houses so they're actually able to hold the heat that we are paying extortionate amounts of money for. Otherwise, it's literally flying out the window. So lots of different fronts that I think we need to fight on, but definitely ways that I think we can sort of share and learn in the struggle for tenants' rights across the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. But one of the things, as you mentioned already, that I know that you were campaigning on a rent freeze, and this, and it being necessary, it has come through. You said it's obviously not as good as it should be. I mean, one of the things that you've already mentioned is that luckily that bill has passed, so that prices won't just immediately get raised in March. But I did see that it was only till March, and that was the immediate thought I went to. Won't there just be evictions? Once this is over, won't there just be price changes? How you must have been over the moon when it came through, but how have you felt about it since learning about the details?
I mean, we haven't learned about the details, to be honest, but there's still quite a lot to be answered, especially because at the moment, the rent freeze only really applies to private tenants, because social and council tenants get a rent increase in April. So obviously that's already happened. So we need to see whether this can be extended until then. So we've been pushing for a rent freeze as very much as an emergency motion, but we really need to see the introduction of rent controls to bring those prices of rents down. So we at Living Rent endorse a points-based system of rent controls, which where the price of the property is tied to the quality. So it incentivizes landlords to keep up repairs. Earlier this year, we were campaigning around a big consultation the Scottish Government had around rent controls, and we got over 7,000 responses through a petition that we had sort of out in street stalls and door knocking and online, where people were endorsing our vision of rent controls. So there's clearly very popular support for it, but it is difficult because there's also very popular support for landlords from landlords in positions of power everywhere, really. So it's difficult. I think it's easy to see the rent freeze as automatically great, and that's the kind of done, but we have a lot more that we still need to be doing, and lots more that we're working on at the moment. We don't yet know how the rent freeze is going to be applied. For people who received a rent increase notice in that week, will it apply to them? There's a lot of people hanging in the balance, because this is, it is good for now, but also people's rents have been increasing for years, and lots of people have been forced to move out of their homes because they couldn't afford the rent in the past few months. So we're also questioning why, at this point rather than earlier, was the rent freeze applied.
I'm going to be slight devil's advocate. As I already mentioned, I'm a renter, so I'm firmly on the side of tenants. But one of the arguments I always see on Twitter is like landlords go, "Well, we've had an increase in our mortgage and interest rates are going up, and it's not fair on us." What is the correct reply to that? Because not that I have. I should my bias. I don't have much sympathy for, but obviously it is an issue. Obviously we've just had a interest rate increase again today. How do you kind of counter that argument? What's the best way to counter it? Is what I should ask from my own from my own social media experience.
Yeah, well, you have to take a deep breath first and stop staring. This is my first advice. Don't reply to anyone that just is like an egg or like a no profile picture, because it never goes well. I broke my own advice yesterday and almost got in an argument with someone, but I just stepped back. No, but in a serious way, I think housing is a volatile market, and landlords know that when they get into the market. So if things go up and down, it's not really the burden of tenants to shoulder that responsibility, because they are in the power. They, own our homes and are charging far above, one would imagine, most house rents are far above their mortgage rates. And it's very difficult for tenants to argue against that. Before the rent freeze, or just generally in Scotland, if you want to contest a rent rise, you take it to a tribunal, and all they look at are the market rates, which is just whatever landlords want to do. And ultimately, at a tribunal, they can decide that your rent should go up rather than go down, which is horrifying. So it's quite a difficult option for tenants to take. So I think it's far more difficult for tenants to get by than it is for landlords, and I don't think we should be expected to take on their costs. Ultimately, we shouldn't make it so that being a landlord is a job. These are our homes, and housing is a human right. So again, I don't have much sympathy for them, but I think it's difficult, because I think you can't just pass on those costs on to tenants who are already struggling, who don't have that property asset to their name as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's the timing as well, as with the energy crisis, with the cost of living crisis, to then increase rents on top of that is just so cruel. It feels so very cruel. And this is perhaps on a slight tangent, but I always feel like, you hear about sort of renting in many other countries. France, it's a really normal thing to do in France. And obviously there are places where it's horrific, like Hong Kong is, I know, particularly terrible. But are Scotland and the UK as a whole kind of an outlier when it comes to tenants' rights? Does it feel that landlords have a particular level of power here that they don't have in other places around the world? Because it just seems like such as you say, a volatile market.
Yeah, I suppose, we can kind of look to the past a little bit, and we have had rent controls in the past. So it's definitely, we can get back to that. But I think we can't overstate the impact of Thatcher on politics as a whole, which is something that we have definitely seen today with the rise of the Chancellor's new budget, which is great news for all of us. But I think as well, there's sort of that cultural aspect in a lot of continental European countries. Well, I'm thinking maybe particularly of Germany or France. There's less of a culture of home ownership than here. So there is, maybe, I think something that we find really when we talk to people and ask if they want to get involved in sort of the tenants union movement is very much that they don't want to be a tenant ever, that the ultimate goal is home ownership. So why would they want to make renting better? It's very much viewed as this is just what you do when you don't have enough money to own a house, which I don't think is necessarily the case. I think that the rental system doesn't have to be so terrible. I think it's terrible by design and it's terrible politically. But we, as tenants, have political power when we band together. So I think we do have the option of making it better. And as I kind of referred to before as well, landlords have such a chokehold on that political power in the UK, at both Westminster and Holyrood. There's huge amounts of MPs and MSPs who are landlords. I don't know precisely how that figure would compare to other countries, but I think that is still quite astounding that people who own property and rent it out are in charge of our political decisions about renting and how that works in the country. So I think I can only speak from my own experience as someone who's lived in the UK pretty much their whole life. So that's kind of how I see it in terms of the tenants' rights situation here. But again, I think there's lots we can learn from other countries and sort of take from the way that they manage tenants' unions and things, which is great.
Yeah, I always think it's sort of a shame that sort of renting is seen as like, oh, you can't buy a house, you have to rent. When in other countries it's perfectly normal to rent, and there's loads of boons to it, like not having to fix your own boiler and things like that. It's brilliant. So it's a shame it's such a pain. But it's bearing in mind that there is such a large amount of MPs and Westminster MSPs in the Scottish Government who are landlords, and there is a real sort of force behind landlords, political force. How. What can we learn from your successful campaign as Living Rent? You were successful in, obviously there's issues with the rent freeze, but you were campaigning for it. I know you've helped a lot of individuals, but this was a big sort of national campaign. How did you manage it, and what could other sort of campaigns outside of Scotland learn about this? I know there's the brilliant London Renters Union, but there's a lot of other localised ones. How do you tackle a sort of national issue like this? And is it something you think could be done elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'd love to see rent freezes in lots of other places. I think there is really clear demand for it from people thinking about rent controls. I think something that the pandemic has really brought forward is that people are really willing to have conversations about how we can change things and maybe question systems that we thought would be here forever. So I think we've really tapped into that community power. I think people care so much about our homes and our neighborhoods that it isn't hard to get people to feel powerfully about it. It's to get people organized is the challenge. So we have a few different ways that we operate as a union, kind of thinking through like national legislative change. So we have national campaigns around the push for rent controls, around the climate crisis, around short-term lets. And then on a more local level, we have sort of community change. So we have different branches and groups all across Scotland to build power from the bottom up, really. So trying to build power at the neighbourhood level. So I'm the chair of a branch in Gorgie Dalrye in Edinburgh, and our current local campaign is about getting more public toilets in the area. So kind of building power through reaching out to new people, like getting more people on board with sort of the tenant union movement. And then as well, there's direct action that we do through sort of member defence and supporting people with rent increases, supporting people with illegal evictions, supporting people who are having repairs done. One of our members in our branch won £4,000 back a few months ago because they had no heating or hot water for over a year. Wow. So it's kind of a combination of it all, I think. And I think we've really been able to put housing and rental reform sort of on the political landscape in a lot of ways through these different ways, sort of meeting with politicians at different levels, at sort of council and national levels, and just having that membership as well. That's hopefully always growing too. But I think people do already care so much about where they live, and it's just about getting people to see that we can have power together. And I think we've had some really inspiring wins. We were able to bring about some greater protection for tenants through the PRT contract. We won a winter eviction ban during the pandemic. And we've won thousands of pounds back for members. We've won people being able to stay in their homes a bit longer if they were being illegally evicted. There's lots of different things that we keep sort of growing and moving towards, which is great. So I think really having that focus on sort of that community aspect and building power that way, rather than trying, I think maybe if we were more of like a campaign structure, it is quite easy for people to get burnt out. But I think having sort of local branches and working on things from the community level upwards means that we have a more sustainable structure.
It seems like such an absolutely brilliant way to do it, and I think everything you've done has been so fantastic. And I know sort of the rest of, especially down in London, we're looking at the rent freeze, going, I'm really envious and so like brilliant, but also slightly jealous.
Yeah. Coming next for England. we hope.
It's such a major issue in politics right now, and I think it's often It's never really talked about enough across the UK, and the housing minister's often the housing minister in West is an MP who's often using it as a stepping stone to get somewhere else. But it's possibly one of the biggest crises we have. So no, it's amazing what you're doing, and I just wanted to ask as the last question really, which is, you know, apart from yourself and Living Rent, are there other organisations, campaigns, or people that you would recommend listeners follow or check out for sort of good work on rights to affordable housing? Obviously, we have got lots of listeners in Scotland, and they'll check you out. Are there any other localised groups that you'd recommend, or even sort of national ones?
Yeah, of course. So I think you already mentioned London Renters Union, who do a really great job down in London, and as well our sister organisation in England, Acorn, has lots of different branches and groups in England and Wales with that focus on community issues. So they were a founding member of Enough is Enough, who we're affiliated to now in Scotland as well. So really excited to see what's going to be happening in terms of Enough is Enough. We had a really amazing Scotland launch for it a couple of weeks ago, where one of our members, Annie, did an amazing speech, and that was, I think, a good example of sort of that solidarity between different organisations. So something we've been doing as a union a lot over summer is strike solidarity with absolutely everyone who's been on strike, which has been really amazing to kind of build those connections and strengthen things up, because I think all of our struggles are really connected. You know, obviously, like, we can't pay our rents if our wages go down. We can't afford to heat our homes if our bills are so high and it's an incredibly drafty home. So we see everything as incredibly interconnected. So yeah, really, really excited at this moment, even though it seems like everything is terrible, which it is. But I think it's a really momentous moment in terms of thinking about where we go next, and it's really inspiring to see so many people engage that maybe felt really politically hopeless for the last few years, and to finally stand up and say, you know, this is not okay. Enough is enough. Like, we've had too much of politicians treating us like we are just to be used, really. So I think we can all build on our wins, and a victory for one of us is a victory for all, really. So I think just carry on seeing what everyone else is doing, really. I know that October 1st is going to be a big day for lots of action all over the UK. I know that there are many different groups, including Enough is Enough, planning lots of movement and protests. So I'd advise people to get along to one, or, you know, maybe just head down to a picket line if you know someone is on strike near you, and just have a chat with someone.
Thanks so much to Aditi for having time to chat. You can find Living Rent at livingrent.org, where you can find all of their campaigns and details on how to join if you're a listener in Scotland. They are on Twitter at living_rent, Living Rent Scotland on Facebook, and they're on Instagram too, as well as many accounts for all of their different local groups. Big thanks to Pablo, who recommended I speak to Aditi quite some time ago. Sorry it's taken so long. That was quite a nice, hopeful chat, wasn't it? Which is rare at the moment. But in these endlessly despairing times, what else would you like to hear about? Who shall I chat to? More worldly things, more local things? What campaigns? Send all thoughts, wisdoms, or fevered dream annotations about possible guests to partlypoliticalbroadcast@gmail.com. And that is it for this week's Partly Political Broadcast podcast. Next week will be knee-deep in conference season, so in order to get ready for what will be my nuanced political debates on how many swears I can fit into the intro to remotely convey how frustrating all possible political directions the country is going in will be, why not make sure you're subscribed to this here podcast? Tell others who may enjoy it to subscribe too, give it a review on one of the podcast sites, and if you're one of the 3 people that benefited from the mini-budget on Friday, maybe donate to the Ko-fi or Patreon too. Merci beaucoup to Acast, my brother-in-law Skeptic, and Cat Day. And this will be back next week when the pound falls so low that it becomes anti-money and Brits have to pay people to take it. But Kwarteng backs it as we now have a cheap metal export, and therefore he's restarted British industry, don't you know? Bye! This week's show was sponsored by Kwasi Kwarteng's Growth Plan. Feeling small? Wishing you could beef up and get hench to show off down the Lidl? Use Kwarteng's plan of 6 daily supplements that cost more the less you earn, and you will diminish in size until you're so small that you'll become one with the ether, and really isn't that actually bigger than you ever were to begin with. Growth Plan by Kwarteng, for those who know real growth is being strong enough to shrink and die. Please note, on full disappearance, all your assets will be claimed by O'Day Asset Management.